Robot Car with the JackBord Me-Kit RV1. In this video, we're going to make a wheeled robot that you can drive around, and we're going to use the Me-Kit RV1. When the robot's complete, it will look something like this, and you'll be able to drive it around outside like this. Unpacking the kit and checking the parts. Firstly, we need to unpack the kit parts and check that we have everything we need. Looking at the picture, first of all you should have two yellow motors. Then you should have two 90-degree angle brackets and two universal motor mounts. Below these we have one large house plate, and underneath that is the front trolley wheel. On the lower left we have two wheels with tyres. Starting on the top right hand corner, we have four 25mm long M3 bolts, four nylon M3 nuts, and four M3 washers. Below those we have 12 8mm long M4 bolts, 12 M4 nuts, and 12 M4 washers. And finally the tools consist of a hex tool and an Allen key. And of course you need a JackBord. How the robot works. Looking at the picture, the robot is made up of two drive wheels at the back and a trolley wheel at the front. Each of the robot's drive wheels has its own drive motor. The trolley wheel isn't driven at all, it simply goes where the robot pushes it. The robot is steered by varying the relative speed of each of the drive motors. This is called differential steering. For example, if both of the drive motors are turned off and we turn on the left motor, the robot will turn right. Likewise, if the robot's again stopped and we turn on the right motor, the robot will turn left. Thus, by controlling the relative speeds of each of the drive motors, you can turn the robot in any direction you wish. The two drive motors are controlled by the JackBord, and the JackBord uses a special device called a motor driver to supply the amount of power that the motors need. Now that we know a little about how the robot works, let's look at the construction. Construction summary. In this section we're going to summarize the construction process, and after that we'll get into it. Firstly, we need to take the two yellow motors and attach them to the universal motor mounts. After that, we attach the 90-degree angle brackets to the universal motor mounts. This will give us two motors, the left and the right, that are ready for mounting on the robot. Once the two drive motors are mounted, your robot will look like this. The next step is to fit the front trolley wheel to the robot, so that it looks like this. And the final step is to connect the motor wires to the drive ports on the JackBord. Once we fit the tyres, your robot should look like this. Now let's go through each of the steps in more detail and build the robot. Attaching the left motor to the universal motor plate. First, get the left-hand motor and attach it to the drive plate like this. Next, we'll take the two M3 bolts and insert them through the holes in the drive plate and the motor like this. When you look side on, it should look like this. Pay particular attention to the fact that the yellow part of the motor is poking out from the left-hand side of the universal drive plate. If yours doesn't look like this, and the yellow part of the motor is poking out on the right-hand side, you need to turn it around so that it pokes out on the left-hand side. Now take two of the M3 washers and place one on each of the bolts. Next, get two of the M3 nylon nuts and attach one to each of the bolts. Once in place, use the Allen key and the hex tool to tighten up the nuts. Be careful not to tighten them too much, they should be hand tight. If you tighten them too much, the gears in the gearbox won't be able to work and the motor won't function. Your motor should now look like this. Remember, this is the left-hand drive motor, so when you look at it from a side like this, you should see the yellow part of the motor poking out from the left-hand side of the bracket. If yours isn't like this, go back and check your steps. Now that we have the universal motor mount mounted onto the motor, we need to attach the 90-degree angle bracket as shown in the picture. To do this, we use two of the M4 nuts, bolts and washers. Insert the M4 bolts and washers as shown in the picture, and make sure that with the motor end pointing towards you, the angle bracket is pointing out towards the right hand side. and you have the first two holes occupied. Add the M4 nuts and tighten them. While you're tightening them, make sure that the angle bracket is in line with the top of the universal motor mount. Check yours against these pictures and make sure that they're the same. If they're not the same, go back in the process and find out where you went wrong. Next, we'll fit the right-hand drive motor. Attaching the right motor to the universal motor plate. For this task, we're basically going to follow the same process we did for the left motor, but of course you need to pay particular attention to the pictures to make sure that you're actually doing it for the right motor. Take the remaining motor and universal motor mount and the M3 nuts and bolts and washers and attach them as shown in this photograph. Take a look at this picture and make sure that the yellow part of your motor is poking out the right-hand side of the universal motor mount. If it isn't, you need to go back and check. Looking from above, this is how your motor and universal motor mount should look. Now get the remaining right angle bracket, 2 M4 bolts, 2 M4 nuts and 2 M4 washers. Insert the M4 nuts, washer and bolts as shown above and make sure that they occupy the first two holes. Tighten them up. As you tighten up the nuts and bolts, make sure that the 90-degree angle bracket is in parallel with the top of the universal motor mount. They should make a straight line. Once complete, your right-hand motor should look like this. Pay particular attention to the fact that when you look at the motor from the side like this, the yellow part of the motor pokes out to the right, as does the 90-degree angle bracket. On the left-hand motor, they poke out on the left-hand side. Check these pictures to make sure that yours matches them. If it doesn't, go back and check and see what went wrong. If all has gone well, by this point you should have two complete drive motors, the one on the left and the one on the right, each connected to a universal motor mount and a 90-degree bracket that will allow you to connect them to the JackBord's body. Now, we need to take our newly created motors and mount them onto the body of the JackBord. That's what we're going to do next. Attaching the left motor. We're going to attach the left drive motor to the left-hand side of the JackBord. First, take 2 of the M4 bolts and insert them in the 2 holes indicated on the lower edge of the JackBord. To check if you're in the right place, you should be able to see the charger socket on the left-hand side. Take your left motor drive bracket and attach it like this and add 2 washers and 2 M4 nuts. To make life easier, use your finger to keep the bolts from falling out of the holes. Then use the Allen key and the hex tool to tighten up the nuts. As you're tightening up the nuts, make sure that your left-hand motor is parallel to the side of the JackBord. When you're done, it should look like this. Because we're mounting the left-hand drive motor, when you look at the robot from the side after you've done the bolts up, you should see the yellow part of the motor poking out from the left-hand side of the universal motor mount. Also note that you can see the charger socket to the left. This means you've got the left-hand drive motor on the left-hand side of the JackBord. If yours doesn't look like this, go back through these steps and check to see where you went wrong. Here are some more pictures to check your robot against. Next, we're going to mount the right-hand drive motor. Attaching the right motor. Now we're going to attach the right-hand drive motor to the JackBord. The process we're going to follow is basically the mirror image of what we just did for the left-hand motor. First, get 2 M4 bolts and mount them in the 2 holes at the right-hand side on the back lower plate of the JackBord, as shown in the picture. Use your finger to hold the 2 bolts in place as you put the motor bracket onto the JackBord. Then add a washer and the 2 M4 nuts and do them up with the Allen key and the hex tool, all the while making sure that the motor mount is parallel to the JackBord's body. Once you're done, it should look like this. And when you look underneath the JackBord, it should look like this. Notice that the drive motors are all parallel to the sides of the JackBord. Looking from behind with your robot upside down, something you should notice is that the actual motors of the drive motors are facing towards the front of the robot, and the wheel axles are facing towards the back of the robot. If your robot looks like this, you've got them in the correct place. Here are some more pictures of a completed right-hand motor for you to compare. Now that the drive motors are both mounted, we're going to attach the tyres. Attaching the tyres. The two tyres simply push on to the axles of each drive motor, but what you need to look out for is that the drive motor's shaft is actually elongated, and likewise there's a matching hole in the tyre. These must align in order for you to be able to push the tyre onto the shaft. So start by getting the left-hand drive motor's tyre, aligning up the holes in the shaft and pressing it on gently. Once you've done that, do the same with the right-hand tyre and motor. When you're done, your robot should look like this. When you look underneath, the robot will look like this. The next step is to attach the trolley wheel on the front. Attaching the front trolley wheel. To attach the front trolley wheel, you're going to need these parts: a large house plate, the trolley wheel, 4 M4 bolts, 4 M4 nuts, and 4 M4 washers. The first step is to attach the large house plate to the lower front of the JackBord using 2 of the M4 bolts as shown in the picture. On the other side, attach 2 washers and 2 M4 nuts and do them up. Looking top down on the front of your JackBord, it should now look like this. Because the holes along the edge of the JackBord don't match the holes on the trolley wheel, we need to use the grooves on the house plate to provide a place for us to bolt onto the trolley wheel. Get the M4 bolts, insert them into the grooves and then put them into the holes on the trolley wheel. Move them around until they line up as shown in the picture. Once you've successfully done that and got the bolts in place, the edges of the trolley wheel should align nicely with the edges of the house plate as shown in the picture. Now, while holding the bolts in place with your fingers, turn the robot over and add the washers and 2 M4 nuts as shown in the picture. Tighten them up and your robot should now look like this. Compare what you've done with these pictures, and if they don't match up, go back in the process and try and see where you went wrong. Now that we've successfully mounted the drive motors and the front trolley wheel, we need to connect the drive motors to the JackBord so that the JackBord can actually power them. This is what we're going to do next. Plugging the motors into the JackBord. Looking at the underside of the robot, you can see that each of the drive motors has its own wires coming out. These connect to the JackBord and allow the JackBord to drive the motors. Looking at the JackBord from above, port E is located on the lower right-hand corner. And looking closely at port E, you can see that there's a pair of pins for the left motor and a pair of pins for the right motor. Looking at the drive motor cables themselves, you can see that each one has a red wire and a black wire. And looking at port E, each of the motor ports has a red square and a black square. So when you plug a motor into port E, you must make sure that the red wire goes into the pin opposite the red square, and that the black wire goes into the pin opposite the black square. Now take the wire from the left-hand drive motor and plug it into the left-hand motor port on port E. Compare yours with the picture. Now take the wire from the right-hand drive motor and plug it into the right-hand motor port on port E, as shown in the picture. Now that you have both cables from the drive motors plugged in, your robot should look like this. Take close note of how the wires are connected. Make sure that the 2 red wires are in the same place and that they are pointing towards the end of the connector. Here are some more pictures. Compare your robot with the ones in the pictures, and if they're not the same, trace back and try and find out where you made a mistake. Now that we've got the drive motors connected to the robot, we need to learn how to drive it, and we're going to do that next. Driving your robot. To start driving your robot, the first thing you need to do is turn on the JackBord. Next, log into your dashboard. Once on your dashboard, click on the Drive link on the top left-hand corner of the page, and this will take you to the Drive page. Give the JackBord some time to connect, and then you can start driving your robot. To do this, use the joystick in the top left-hand corner. If you push the joystick forward, your robot will go forward. If you pull it back, your robot will go back. And if you let it go, your robot will stop. And likewise, if you want to turn left, push the joystick to the left. And if you want to turn right, push it to the right. The up and down arrows on the right-hand side allow you to change the sensitivity of the joystick. Clicking the lower arrow or the down pointing arrow will make the joystick less sensitive, and clicking the upwards pointing arrow will make it more sensitive. Congratulations! Now you have a robot that you can drive around anywhere you like. And this is only the beginning. In future videos, we'll describe how you can do a lot more with a driven robot. In the meantime, if you run into troubles or you need any more help, try visiting www.jackbord.org.